I planned one of my most anticipated road trips down to the last details. Routes, restaurants, every major stop, and parts of it still fell flat. I remember staying at the Grand Canyon, one of the most famous places in the world, and thinking, this is it? And that thought kind of made me feel terrible because I thought maybe I was doing something wrong. But over time, I realized something important. The feeling usually has nothing to do with the destination, and almost nobody talks about the reason why this happens. Hi, I'm Teresa from an acre in the city. I've explored all 50 states and over 82% of the National Park Service sites. And I've learned that sometimes the hardest part of travel isn't the planning, it's understanding what you were expecting it to give you in the first place. If you've ever walked away from a trip feeling like something was missing, even though it looked great on paper, then this video is for you. Because a lot of trips don't feel off because they were badly planned. Sometimes they feel off because of what we expected of them. And once I started to understand that, I started to plan trips a little bit differently. Most people feel like a trip feels disappointing because they planned it wrong. A lot of the time, the problem is that they plan too much. You can optimize the route, book the perfect hotels, map every stop, and still leave yourself no room to actually experience the trip. Because what you can't schedule are the following: your energy level, your mood, the weather, and the dynamic of the people you're traveling with. And when every hour already has a purpose, the trip, it stops feeling like an adventure. It kind of starts feeling like a job, which is probably what you're trying to escape from in the first place. I think that's one of the biggest traps with road trips. At some point, the planning quietly becomes the goal instead of the experience itself. Next, we need to talk about the expectation gap. This starts to happen before the trip even really starts. Most of us already had a version of the trip living in our head, and that version is really hard for reality to compete with. Social media has completely changed the way we think travel should feel like. Golden hour, empty overlooks, constant wonder. But what we don't see is the traffic, the waiting, the exhaustion, and the 100 photos somebody took before they found the perfect one to post online. Some famous places, they're just okay. Four Corners was one of those moments for me. I'd seen the photos, and I had this image in my head of what it would feel like. And when I got there, it was basically a concrete slab with a line of people waiting for a photo, which in fact you were only limited to 2 photos, so the line would keep moving. Now, that doesn't mean that it was a bad stop necessarily. It just means that the reality and my expectations were 2 different things. And that gap, that's usually where the disappointment lives. This is one of the reasons why I think themed road trips work so well. When the trip has a personality, beyond just checking out famous places, it feels more meaningful from the start. That's why I put together a free PDF that has themed road trip ideas that you can take for your next adventure. It has things like lighthouses, factory tours, scenic food routes, and other quirky roadside themes. Hello, ice cream trail. I'll link that below if you want some fresh ideas for yourself. Have you ever considered that exhaustion looks a lot like disappointment? A lot of trips that feel emotionally underwhelming are actually physically exhausting. Sleep deprivation, too much driving, switching hotels every night, trying to maximize every hour of the day. That can catch up with people fast, especially on bucket list trips, because there's so much pressure to make the trip worth it. But by day 3, you're running on caffeine, fast food, and decision fatigue. And suddenly, the small things, they start to feel irritating. Sometimes the fix isn't a better destination. It's one slower morning, one extra hour at breakfast, one afternoon where you don't have to rush anywhere. You have to remember that trips can't fix everything. This is probably the hardest part to admit. Sometimes we put way more pressure on the trip than we realize. We hope the trip will fix burnout, reset our mood, repair a relationship, help us feel like ourselves again. And that can be a lot to ask for a 5-day trip to Utah. Travel can absolutely shift your perspective, but changing your scenery doesn't automatically change what you brought with you emotionally. And if something felt unresolved before you left, it usually shows up somewhere around day 2. If this type of honest road trip conversation is helpful for you, hit subscribe, because I really want this channel to be about realistic travel, not just perfect travel. When I think back on the trips I remember the most, it's almost never the headline destination. It's that random diner that we almost skipped, that roadside stop that turned into an hour stay, the random conversation in the middle of nowhere, getting a little lost, and accidentally finding something better. I don't think that's an accident. These moments happened because there was space for them, because the itinerary wasn't packed so tightly that every unexpected thing felt like a problem. Doing less on the trip is actually the hard part. There's this quiet pressure on road trips, especially expensive ones, to maximize every minute, to make it worth it. And that usually turns into checklist travel. 14 attractions in 4 days, constant movement, trying to win the trip somehow. But enjoyment almost always comes from the opposite. staying longer, seeing less, actually being where you are. Giving yourself permission to do less might be one of the hardest planning decisions that there is, but it's also one of the most important. The reason a trip feels off usually has very little to do with where you went. It's usually that gap between what you expected the trip to be and what the road trip can realistically give you. And once you actually understand that, traveling actually gets better, because now you can stop chasing perfection and start noticing what was already there. And if part of the reason why travel feels complicated or disappointing is because you feel like you're constantly waiting for the right time to travel more, watch this next video, because you probably don't need a completely different life to travel more. You may just need a different way of approaching it. Until next time, happy travels.